The first time Caleb Brooks stepped onto Predator Academy soil, the warning sirens laughed before the students did. I was standing in formation on the East training field when the transport shuttle dropped through the red clouds and landed where only ranked hunters were supposed to arrive. Predator Academy did not welcome transfers. It tested them, measured them, and usually sent them home before dinner with a medical waiver and a new respect for staying in their own sector. The school sat on Varketh Prime, a brutal training world with 2 suns, razor wind, and gravity strong enough to make most soft species reconsider ambition after 10 steps. Every cadet there came from a predator lineage. Karate with bone crests and 8-foot frames. Valen stalkers who could hear a heartbeat through steel. Dravik pack fighters who learned pursuit tactics before they learned table manners. And then the hatch opened, and out walked a human. Not a war chief. Not a giant. Not even one of their famous armored marines. Just a man in a dark travel jacket, worn boots, and a duffel bag over one shoulder, 6 feet tall at most, light skin, brown hair, no visible claws, no plated hide, no threat display worth recording. The Academy scanners swept over him and projected the official classification above the landing pad in bright blue letters. Caleb Brooks, Earthborn Exchange Placement, Low Threat Mammal. The entire field went silent for half a second. Then the laughter hit like a wave. 300 Predator cadets roared, clicked, barked, and hissed with amusement. Someone in the back shouted that the supply department had delivered lunch early. Another asked if humans came with a warranty. I admit, I laughed too. We all did. Because the galaxy had rules, and one of them was simple. Prey did not enroll at Predator Academy. Caleb looked up at the glowing classification, blinked once, and shifted the strap of his bag higher on his shoulder. He did not blush. He did not shake. He did not ask for protection, a translator check, or directions to the administrative office. He simply read the sign over the main gate, the old Academy motto carved in black stone. Only the dangerous graduate. Then he turned to the nearest instructor and asked, "Is this the dangerous school?" That question should have embarrassed him. It embarrassed us instead, though we did not understand why yet. Instructor Virak stepped forward, all 9 feet of him, armored shoulders blocking the sun, golden eyes narrowing with the kind of patience teachers reserve for lost children and disappointing paperwork. "Human," he said, letting the word drag across the field like an insult. "There has been a placement error." Caleb nodded politely. "That happens. This institution trains apex combatants." "Good. You were meant for the civilian adaptation campus." Caleb glanced past him at the obstacle towers, the gravity pits, the sparring circles, and the wall of student names ranked by survival score. His eyes moved too calmly, measuring distance, exits, angles, wind direction, guard positions. I noticed that part. I wish I had noticed it harder. I already unpacked mentally, Caleb said. A few cadets laughed again, but softer this time. Virak extended one clawed hand toward the shuttle. "Return to your transport." Caleb looked at the hand, then at the academy gate. He smiled like a man hearing bad advice from someone who meant well. "No, sir," he said. "My orders say Predator Academy." The field went still. Refusing Virak in public was not bravery. It was a scheduling conflict with survival. The instructor leaned closer until his shadow covered the human completely. "Then you will learn quickly." Caleb adjusted his jacket, stepped around him, and walked toward the gate. "That is why I came." And that was the moment Predator Academy made its first mistake. We thought the human had entered our cage. We did not realize he had just checked the lock. By the time Caleb Brooks reached the Academy dining hall, the rumor had already arrived ahead of him, grown teeth, and started hunting for attention. The human was real. The human had refused Instructor Virak. The human had walked through the Predator gate without asking where the safe students ate. That last part mattered, because there was no safe dining hall at Predator Academy. There was only the feeding court, a cavernous steel room built like a stadium, with tiered tables, reinforced benches, and floor drains that the administration insisted were for cleaning. Every meal was a ranking exercise disguised as nutrition. Strong cadets sat high near the heat vents and fresh meat stations. Mid-rank hunters guarded the center tables. New students, injured students, and anyone unfortunate enough to smell nervous ate near the doors, where the cold wind slipped in and everyone could see them hesitate. Caleb entered with his duffel bag still over one shoulder and a meal token in his hand, looking around like he had stepped into a very aggressive high school cafeteria. Conversations died in rings as he passed. Karate cadets lowered their bone crests. Valen stalkers tilted their heads, listening to his breathing. Dravik pack fighters grinned with too many teeth. I sat with my unit 3 tables up, close enough to see the small details. Caleb did not look lost. That was the first irritating thing. He looked tired, hungry, and mildly annoyed that the food line had no clear signage. He took a tray, selected something the translation screen identified as protein loaf, mountain tubers, and mineral broth, then added a sealed bottle of water after checking the label twice. Normal behavior. Boring behavior. Human behavior. Which made the room angrier for reasons none of us admitted. Predators do not like being ignored by something they have already decided is prey. Caleb carried his tray toward the lower tables. Before he reached them, Raxer Vin stepped into his path. Raxer was a third-year dominant striker, nearly 7.5 feet tall, heavy-shouldered, scarlet-scaled, and famous for making first-years switch career tracks before orientation ended. He looked down at Caleb's tray, then at Caleb, then back at the tray as if inspecting a strange insect. "You are sitting there?" Raxer asked, pointing to the lowest table. Caleb glanced at it. "Looks open." "It is open because nobody wants it." "Then I have solved that problem." A few cadets made amused sounds. Raxer did not. He rolled one shoulder forward and bumped Caleb's tray with enough force to send the bottle sliding, the broth tipping, and the protein loaf landing on the floor with a sad little slap. Not dangerous. Not dramatic. Just public. The kind of humiliation designed to make a new student react badly or shrink correctly. Caleb looked down at the spilled food. The room leaned in. This was the moment when most cadets showed what they were. Fight, flee, or fold. Caleb did none of those. He set the tray on the nearest table, bent down, picked up the fallen fork, wiped it with a napkin, and placed it neatly beside the empty tray. Then he looked at Raxer and said, "You done?" It was such a small question. Too small. Raxer's nostrils flared. "You should apologize for standing in my way." Caleb picked up the water bottle, checked that it had not cracked, and twisted the cap open. "I was stationary." "You navigated poorly." The feeding court went quiet so quickly the ventilation fans sounded loud. Raxer stepped closer until his shadow covered Caleb's tray. At this academy, territory belongs to whoever can hold it. Caleb took one sip of water. "Back home, we call that a seating problem." Raxer reached toward the tray again, this time slower, making sure everyone watched. Caleb's hand moved first, not grabbing, not striking, just sliding the tray back exactly 2 inches so Raxer's claws touched empty air. The movement was clean, casual, almost lazy. Raxer froze. For the first time, the giant predator had missed something that was not trying to escape. Caleb looked past him at the service counter. "Do they give replacements?" he asked. "Or is lunch always part of the entrance exam?" Nobody laughed. Not because it was not funny. Because somewhere between the spilled broth and the missed tray, the room had realized the human was not confused. He was studying us. Raxer Vin did not understand what had happened with the tray, which made him angry, and at Predator Academy anger was treated like a leadership qualification. He leaned closer to Caleb Brooks, low enough that his breath stirred the human's hair, and opened his mouth to deliver the kind of threat that usually made first years remember urgent appointments somewhere else. Caleb looked up at him, not impressed, not scared, not even especially. Irritated. Just waiting. That was the worst part. Predators live by reactions. A flinch tells you distance. A widened eye tells you timing. A quick breath tells you fear. Caleb gave Raxer nothing useful. He stood there with one hand around his water bottle and the other resting near the clean fork, as calm as a man waiting for his number at a DMV counter. Around us, the feeding court watched in a silence so tight I could hear claws flexing against metal benches. Raxer lifted one hand and placed it on Caleb's shoulder, not with full force, just enough pressure to say ownership in a language every species in the room understood. The human looked at the hand. Then he looked back at Raxer. "Personal space," Caleb said. Raxer smiled. "This is not a civilian campus." I noticed. "Here, weakness is corrected." "Good policy." "You are weakness." Caleb's expression did not change. "That is an opinion." Raxer pressed down a little harder, trying to make the human bend. Caleb did not fight the pressure. He shifted his left foot half an inch, rolled his shoulder with it, and somehow Raxur's arm slid off balance just enough that the giant had to adjust his stance. It was not an attack. It was not even a move most of us could name. But Instructor Vierock noticed. He had entered the feeding court without sound, which was impressive for someone 9 feet tall, and now he stood near the upper doors with his arms folded and his golden eyes fixed on Caleb's feet. Not his face, not his hands, his feet. That was when I began to feel the first small crack in my confidence. Raxur felt it too, though he mistook it for embarrassment. "Pick up your tray," he growled. Caleb glanced at the tray. "I was going to. Now, after you move." The whole room inhaled at once. Raxur's crest lifted. His packmates started to rise from their bench, eager for the lesson to become official. Vierock's voice cut across the hall before they could step forward. "Enough." The word struck harder than any alarm. Everyone froze except Caleb, who used the interruption to reach past Raxur, pick up his tray, and set it neatly on the table again. Vierock walked down the center aisle, students shifting aside as if the floor itself had become dangerous. He stopped beside Caleb and looked at the spilled meal, the untouched water, the fork placed exactly parallel to the tray edge. "Human," he said, "do you know why this academy permits conflict outside the training ring?" Caleb looked around the room. "Because you want students tired before class?" A few cadets made the mistake of laughing under their breath. Vierock did not. "Because predators reveal themselves under pressure. Hunger, insult, territory, humiliation. These are not distractions. They are curriculum." Caleb nodded like that made perfect sense. "So lunch is homework." Vierock studied him for a long moment. "At Predator Academy, the first rule is simple. Survive the room you are in." Raxur grinned again, confident now that the instructor was turning this into a formal lesson. Caleb looked from Vierock to Raxur, then to the exits, then to the reflective serving wall behind them. His eyes tracked everything, not nervously, but like a carpenter measuring lumber before making a cut. "That is a good rule," Caleb said. Vierock stepped closer. "And what would a human know about surviving predators?" For the first time since the shuttle landed, Caleb's smile disappeared. Not dramatically, not with rage. It simply switched off, and the air around him seemed to get colder. "Sir," he said, voice polite and quiet. "On Earth, we call that growing up." The feeding court did not understand the sentence at first. Then the translators added the planetary note. "Earth, Class 9 Death World, active predation history, hostile weather cycles, high competition biosphere." The room went still for a different reason. Caleb picked up the fork, examined it, and placed it back down with careful precision. "Now," he said, looking at Raxur, "am I getting a new lunch, or is this still the lesson?" Instructor Vierock solved the lunch problem by turning it into a public demonstration, which at Predator Academy was how most small problems became large ones with witnesses. He did not send Caleb Brooks to the food counter. He did not punish Raxur Vin. He simply lifted one clawed hand, and the feeding court tables folded into the floor with a smooth, mechanical growl. Benches retracted, serving walls sealed. The center of the room opened into a circular training mat marked with yellow boundary lights, because apparently even lunch had a combat setting. Caleb looked at the disappearing tables, then at his empty tray. "So that is a no on replacement lunch," he said. Nobody laughed this time. Vierock stepped into the circle and pointed to Caleb with the calm cruelty of a teacher who has found a perfect example. "Cadets, today's first lesson begins early. Environmental dominance. Social pressure. Unexpected challenge. These are the conditions under which predators discover truth." Raxur rolled his shoulders, pleased again, because the lesson had finally become something he understood. A ring. An audience. An instructor's permission. Caleb set his tray aside and walked to the boundary line without hurry. He still carried no weapon. He removed his travel jacket, folded it once, and placed it on the floor outside the ring. That bothered me more than it should have. No predator folds clothing before humiliation. They shed, flare, stamp, roar, display. Caleb organized. Vierock noticed again. "Human, this is a contact assessment. You may yield at any time." Caleb stepped onto the mat. "Good to know. Raxur will test your ability to remain functional under pressure." He seems excited. Raxur entered the circle to a low rumble of approval from the cadets. He was nearly 1.5 feet taller than Caleb, twice as broad through the shoulders, and built by evolution for charging through things that made the mistake of standing still. The Academy odds board appeared above the ring automatically. Estimated human duration, 8 seconds. Someone changed it to 6. Another changed it to 4. Caleb looked up at the numbers. Is that a countdown or customer feedback? VA Rock's eyes narrowed. Begin. Raxer moved first, because of course he did. Predators like Raxer believe the first motion belongs to whoever owns the room. He crossed the mat in a burst of speed, one arm extended to seize control of Caleb's center line and drive him out of the circle. It was a standard dominance entry, powerful, direct, and successful against almost every first year I had ever seen. Caleb did not meet it. He did not retreat wildly either. He took one small step sideways, turned his hips, and let Raxer's force pass where his body had been a blink earlier. Raxer caught himself near the edge, surprised but not embarrassed yet. The cadets made a sharp approving sound. A lucky dodge. Everyone knew those happened. Caleb stood in the center, hands relaxed, breathing unchanged. Raxer came again, lower this time, adjusting for the human's smaller frame. Caleb waited longer than felt safe. Too long. I remember my claws tightening on the rail because every instinct said move. Move now. Move before the larger predator closes the space. Caleb moved at the last possible instant, not away from danger but around it. One hand touching Raxer's wrist for less than a second, the other guiding the elbow just enough to redirect the charge. Raxer stumbled 2 steps, not hurt, not defeated, but repositioned like furniture. The room quieted. VA Rock's expression changed by a fraction. The odds board flickered and removed the timer. Raxer's pride finally cracked. He circled Caleb, slower now. Caleb circled with him, matching the rhythm, eyes not on the claws, not on the teeth, but on the feet. Always the feet. You run strange, Raxer growled. Caleb shrugged. You announce turns with your left heel. That sentence landed harder than a shout. Raxer looked down before he could stop himself. Everyone saw it. Caleb had made a predator check his own body in front of the pack. VA Rock stepped closer to the boundary line, voice colder now. Continue. Raxer lunged a 3rd time, angry enough to be predictable. Caleb exhaled, pivoted, and used 2 fingers against a pressure seam in Raxer's training harness. The harness locked for safety, freezing Raxer upright with a polite academy chime. No crash. No injury. Just one giant warrior standing helpless in front of the entire feeding court, while the low-threat mammal looked at Virok and asked, "Does that count as functional under pressure?" For one breath, Raxer then remained locked in place by his own training harness, and the feeding court learned a new kind of silence. It was not the silence after victory. Predator Academy understood victory. It was not the silence after failure either. We understood that even better. This was the silence that happens when the rulebook looks at a human and quietly steps backward. Caleb Brooks stood in the center of the mat with his hands still open, shoulders relaxed, breathing steady, as if he had just helped someone parallel park. The safety chime on Raxer's harness beeped again, cheerful and humiliating. Instructor Vierock raised one hand, and the system released the giant cadet. Raxer staggered forward half a step, caught himself, and turned slowly. His scarlet scales had darkened along the neck, which in his species meant either rage or deep embarrassment. Usually both. Harness malfunction, he growled. Caleb looked at the harness, then at Vierock. Does that happen often? Vierock did not answer. He was watching Caleb's posture with the expression of a hunter realizing the trail goes both directions. Raxer ripped the training harness open and tossed it aside. The academy floor absorbed the equipment with a magnetic snap before it could slide. No assistive gear, Raxer said. No safety locks. Just movement. A few cadets rumbled approval, but it was weaker now. Less hungry. More careful. Caleb nodded once. All right. That should have been the moment, he looked worried. Without the harness, Raxer had fewer systems to exploit. No safety seams, no automatic locks, no polite academy chimes to save the joke. Just 7.5 feet of trained predator circling a human who still had not eaten lunch. Caleb rolled his neck once, like a guy stretching before a weekend basketball game at a local gym. The disrespect was almost artistic. Raxer moved in a low arc this time, not charging, not showing off, learning from his own mistake. He feinted left, cut right, and reached for Caleb's upper arm with enough speed to make the air snap. Caleb finally gave ground. One step, then another. The room exhaled in relief. There it was. The human was retreating. The natural order had returned. Except Caleb was not retreating randomly. He was drawing Raxer along the yellow boundary lights, keeping the larger cadet turning. Adjusting, overcorrecting. 3 steps. 4. 5. Raxer's left heel dragged for the smallest fraction of a second. Caleb's eyes dropped to it. Mine did too. I did not know why until the next instant. Caleb stopped moving backward. Raxer expected empty space and found a wall made of timing. Caleb shifted inside the reach, placed one palm against Raxer's forearm, the other against the shoulder ridge, and turned his whole body as if closing a heavy door. Raxer spun past him, not thrown, not struck, simply redirected by his own speed and weight. His foot crossed the boundary line. The mat flashed white. Match point, human participant. The announcement sounded ridiculous. It also sounded final. Raxer stared at the line under his foot. The feeding court stared with him. Caleb stepped back immediately, giving him space, which somehow made it worse. He was not celebrating. He was not breathing hard. He was looking toward the service counter again. Now, Caleb asked, about that replacement lunch? Vierock's jaw tightened. He had wanted a lesson in predator dominance. Instead, he had received a lesson in leverage, patience, and why Earth species did not need claws when they understood momentum. Raxer lowered his head, not in surrender, not fully, but enough for every cadet to see the first crack in the hierarchy. Caleb had not beaten him like a monster. He had solved him like a problem. That was far more frightening. Instructor Vierock did not give Caleb Brooks his replacement lunch. He gave him gravity instead, which told us everything about how badly the human had unsettled him. The feeding court ceiling opened in concentric rings, and the combat mat sank below the floor, carrying Caleb, Raxer, and Vierock into the Academy's lower training chamber. The rest of us followed along the observation ramps, suddenly less interested in food and much more interested in seeing whether the low-threat mammal had simply found one clever trick or whether Earth had sent us a walking correction notice. The gravity chamber was one of Predator Academy's proudest tools, a circular arena built from black alloy, pressure glass, and old arrogance. It could simulate jungle pull, cliffside, strain, deep ocean drag, and battlefield fatigue without ever leaving campus. Most first-year cadets trained at 0.8 standard gravity. Advanced warriors trained at 1.2. Instructors used 1.5 when they wanted silence. Vierock stepped to the control pillar and placed one claw on the authorization plate. Human, he said, you have demonstrated situational awareness. Now we test endurance. Caleb looked around the chamber with mild interest. Is there a waiver? No good. Paperwork takes forever. A few cadets almost laughed, then remembered Raxer standing behind him with his pride still limping. Vierock adjusted the settings. The floor lights shifted from yellow to orange. 1.3 standard gravity, he announced. The chamber hummed. I felt it through the observation rail, a thick downward pressure that made shoulders tighten and breathing more deliberate. Several younger cadets straightened their backs too quickly and regretted it. Raxer rolled his arms, pleased to be back in familiar territory. Heavy conditions favored larger frames, stronger legs, denser muscle. Or so we believed. Caleb bent his knees once, bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, and frowned. Vierock caught it. Struggling. Caleb looked genuinely confused. No, sir. I was waiting for it to start. The control room went very quiet. Vierock's upper lip curled. He increased the setting. 1.6. The orange lights deepened. Now even seasoned cadets shifted their weight. A Valen observer beside me braced both hands against the rail. Raxer's breath grew louder, but he remained stable. Caleb stood with his hands loose at his sides, not relaxed exactly, but settled, as if the floor had finally become familiar. His posture improved. That made no sense to us. Pressure should compress a body. It should steal speed, bend joints, and punish balance. Caleb looked more comfortable than he had in the dining hall. Vierock stared at the readings. Your home world gravity is higher than listed. Caleb shook his head. No, sir. Your listed standard is just optimistic. That answer moved through the cadets like cold water. Vierock raised the gravity again. 1.9. The chamber groaned softly. Raxer took one step and had to reset his stance. Across the observation ramps, crests lowered, tails stilled, breathing patterns changed. Caleb finally stretched his shoulders and smiled, small and almost apologetic. That is closer. Instructor Vieirac did not like that at all. He activated the movement drill. 3 training pillars rose from the floor and began sliding across the arena in slow, heavy patterns designed to force footwork under strain. Raxer moved first, powerful but shortened by the added pull. Caleb moved after him, and the entire room understood at once that we had been measuring the wrong thing. He was not faster than every predator. He was not stronger than Raxer. He was worse. He was efficient. Every step landed under his center. Every turn wasted nothing. Every breath matched the rhythm of the room. Earth had not made him flashy. Earth had made him hard to exhaust. Raxer tried to cut him off near a pillar, but the heavier gravity betrayed the larger cadet's recovery. Caleb slipped past with inches to spare, tapped the pillar, and used its motion to change direction without losing speed. The Academy system chimed. Human participant maintains optimal balance. Vieirac silenced the announcement with one furious tap. Caleb looked up at the observation ramps, then at the instructor. "Sir," he said, still breathing evenly. "Is this full gravity?" No one moved. Even Raxer stopped pretending not to hear. Vieirac's claws hovered over the controls. For the first time since I had known him, our instructor looked at a student and did not see prey, weakness, or error. He saw a planet standing behind him. Instructor Vieirac should have ended the lesson when Caleb Brooks asked whether the gravity chamber had reached full power. A wise teacher would have paused, reviewed the data, and quietly updated the Academy's human safety file before pride got involved. Vieirac was many things: brilliant, disciplined, terrifyingly experienced, and absolutely not wise when 300 cadets were watching his authority shrink by the second. His claws remained above the control pillar for one long moment. Then he withdrew his hand and stepped into the arena himself. The observation ramps went so still that even the ventilation system seemed nervous. Raxer Vin backed away from the center without being told. That alone would have been unthinkable 10 minutes earlier. Nobody wanted to stand between Vieirac and whatever lesson he believed the humans still needed. Caleb noticed the shift. He looked from the instructor to the silent cadets, then to the gravity indicators glowing along the wall. "Sir," he said carefully, "am I being tested or corrected?" Vieirac rolled his shoulders, and the plates of his instructor armor unlocked into training mode. At Predator Academy, those are often the same thing. Caleb nodded once. That sounds inefficient. A few students made soft choking sounds and immediately pretended they had not. Vieirac's golden eyes narrowed. "You have mistaken restraint for equality." "No, sir," Caleb said. "I have mistaken lunch for lunch." That was the line that did it. Vieirac crossed the arena with a speed that made every cadet remember why he taught here and did not merely guard the gate. He did not charge like Raxer. He cut angles. He used the moving pillars, the heavier gravity, the reflective walls, the whole chamber as part of his approach. For the first time all day, Caleb had to move quickly. He slipped behind one pillar, ducked under a sweeping capture arm, and stepped sideways as Vieirac's open palm passed close enough to stir his shirt. No contact, no injury, just pressure, real pressure, the kind that makes the audience stop enjoying the show and start counting exits. Vieirac turned again, faster, forcing Caleb toward the outer ring where the floor plates shifted unpredictably. Caleb gave ground. 5 feet, 10, 15. His back neared the pressure glass. The cadets leaned forward. There it was, we thought. The human had a limit. Caleb's breathing changed at last, not panicked, but focused, dropping into a rhythm so steady it felt practiced. Vieirac saw the wall behind him and extended one arm to pin the angle shut. Caleb glanced at the instructor's feet. Just once. That tiny glance bothered me more than any dodge. He was still studying. Even while losing space, he was collecting information. Vieirac pressed harder, guiding him exactly where he wanted. "You cannot outmatch a trained predator in his own terrain," he said. Caleb's shoulder brushed the glass. He smiled faintly. "I was not trying to outmatch you." Vieirac stopped half a step too late. Caleb stepped onto the edge seam between two floor plates, let the shifting panel carry his weight for a fraction of a second, and used the chamber's own movement to slide past the instructor's blind side. It was not strength. It was timing. It was the kind of solution no predator would choose because it looked too small to matter until it had already changed everything. Vierock spun, but the heavy gravity slowed his recovery just enough. Caleb tapped 2 fingers against the instructor armor's balance sensor, then moved away before the system realized what had happened. The armor stiffened for safety, not fully, just for half a second. Half a second was enough. Caleb stood behind him, calm, hands open, voice respectful. Your right step shortens when you are angry, sir. The words landed across the chamber like a door closing. Vierock did not move. Neither did we. Caleb had not overpowered the instructor. He had read him. In Predator Academy, that was worse. For the first time in my life, I saw Instructor Vierock hesitate in front of a student. It lasted less than a second, but every predator in the chamber felt it. Predators notice hesitation the way birds notice thunder. Caleb Brooks stood behind him, hands open, face calm, still breathing like the gravity chamber was a brisk walk through a Denver parking lot. Vierock turned slowly, and the Academy armor released from its brief safety lock with a low mechanical tone. His eyes were not angry anymore. That was worse. Anger had made him readable. Now he was focused. Again, Vierock said. Caleb glanced toward the observation ramps, where 300 cadets leaned over the rails without making a sound. Raxer Vin stood near the outer line, arms lowered, pride forgotten for the moment. The odds board above the arena tried to calculate a new prediction, failed twice, and finally displayed insufficient data. Caleb noticed it and gave the smallest smile. That is fair, he said. Vierock moved without warning, but this time there was no pride in it, no broad demonstration for students, no lesson hidden inside embarrassment. He became efficient. He cut the arena into smaller spaces, used the pillars to block Caleb's exits, changed rhythm every 3 steps, and forced the human toward the center where the floor plates rose and fell under simulated terrain. Caleb finally looked pressured. He pivoted, slid, ducked under a restraint line, then stepped over a shifting seam with less than an inch to spare. His boots scraped once. The sound made the entire chamber inhale. Vierock heard it too and pressed forward, not to harm him, but to end the assessment cleanly. Caleb's back foot touched the center marker. The Academy system chimed, warning both participants that balance margins were narrowing. Vierock extended one arm to control the space. Caleb looked trapped. That was what we thought. Later, when the replay was slowed down frame by frame, we saw the truth. Caleb had been building the trap from the moment Vierock stepped into the arena. Every retreat had pulled the instructor into a pattern. Every near miss had trained him to expect one more backward step. Every glance at the floor had mapped the moving plates, not for escape, but for timing. Vierock reached. Caleb stepped forward. Not back. Forward. The human moved inside the instructor's guard before the armor could adjust, placed one hand on Vierock's forearm, the other lightly against the chest plate, and shifted his weight with the rising floor beneath them. It looked gentle. It looked almost polite. Then Vierock's own momentum turned against him. His stance opened. His armor tried to protect him. His balance system locked. Caleb guided him down to one knee on the training mat and stopped there, controlled, careful, leaving the instructor stable and unharmed. The chamber did not cheer. It did not gasp. It went empty, silent in a way Predator Academy had never been silent before. Vierock, the hunter who had corrected champions, the instructor whose name made first years stand straighter, was kneeling in his own gravity chamber because a human had understood the room better than he did. Caleb released him immediately and stepped back with respect. "Assessment complete, sir?" he asked. Vierock looked up at him for a long moment. I expected rage. I expected denial. Instead, the instructor slowly placed one palm on the mat, rose to his feet, and lowered his head by 1 exact inch. Not submission. Recognition. That was the sound that changed the school. Not a roar. Not an alarm. 1 inch of respect from the most feared instructor on Varkith Prime. Across the observation ramps, cadets who had mocked Caleb an hour earlier looked away when his eyes passed over them. Raxer stepped back from the boundary line. The Valen stopped tracking his heartbeat. Even the Dravik pack fighters lowered their crests. Caleb Brooks picked up his folded jacket from the arena edge, brushed a bit of dust from the sleeve, and looked toward the dining lift. Now, he said. I would really like lunch. Nobody blocked his path. The dining lift carried Caleb Brooks back to the feeding court, and the entire academy followed at a respectful distance like nobody wanted to admit they were following him. The tables had risen again. The service counters had reopened. The floor had been cleaned so thoroughly that no trace of the earlier humiliation remained, which felt fitting because Predator Academy had already begun pretending it had never laughed. Caleb walked to the food line, accepted a fresh tray, and this time the server placed 2 extra portions on it without being asked. He looked at the mountain tubers, the protein loaf, the mineral broth, and the sealed water bottle, then gave the server a polite nod. Thank you, he said. That tiny phrase landed strangely in the room. Predators respected challenge, rank, silence, and warning displays. Gratitude after victory was not in the manual. Caleb carried his tray to the lowest table again, the same one everyone avoided before. He sat down, unwrapped his fork, and started eating like the last hour had been an annoying orientation delay. Nobody sat across from him. Nobody sat beside him. Not at first. Raxer Vin approached after 3 minutes, moving slower than usual, with his crest lowered and his meal tray held in both hands. The entire feeding court watched him cross the floor. He stopped at the far end of Caleb's table. Is this seat claimed? He asked. Caleb looked up, chewed, swallowed, and gestured to the bench. Looks open. Raxer sat. That was the second sound that changed the school. Not the respect from VA Rock. Not the failed odds board. A ranked predator asking permission to sit at the humans' table. By evening, the academy records had been updated. I saw the file myself because every cadet saw it. The old classification, low-threat mammal, vanished from the system with no ceremony and a lot of embarrassment. The new entry appeared beneath Caleb's name in steady amber letters. Human, Earthborn, adaptive combatant, high environmental tolerance, advanced pattern recognition, do not provoke without instructor authorization. Someone in administration tried to soften the last line. VA Rock restored it within 6 seconds. The next morning, Caleb arrived at first formation wearing the same dark jacket and worn boots, carrying a notebook like a normal student on a normal campus. The field parted for him before anyone ordered it. Not widely, not dramatically, just enough. Predators understand paths. They know when to block one and when to create one. VA Rock stood at the front of the formation, reading from a revised curriculum tablet. Today, he announced, we begin a new unit. Human Tactical Adaptation. A ripple moved through the cadets. Raxer stared straight ahead. Caleb raised one hand. VA Rock paused. Yes, Brooks. Does this unit include lunch breaks? No one laughed until VA Rock did, once, low and brief, and somehow that made it acceptable for the rest of us to breathe again. The lesson that followed was not about claws, speed, size, or intimidation. It was about patience, footwork, terrain, timing. It was about how a soft-skinned species from a brutal blue planet learned to survive things larger, faster, louder, and better armed by becoming harder to predict than fear itself. Weeks later, new cadets still arrived believing the old rule carved above the gate. Only the dangerous graduate. Then they saw Caleb Brooks sitting calmly at the lower table, sharing water with the same warrior who had once tried to make him leave, and they learned the correction before making our mistake. Dangerous did not always roar. Sometimes it folded its jacket, checked the exits, asked for lunch, and smiled like the room had already taught it everything it needed to know. That is why Predator Academy changed its private warning files, not just for Caleb, but for his entire species. Humans were no longer listed as accidental placements, civilian transfers, or fragile exchange candidates. The new category was shorter, colder, and written in bold across every training terminal on Varkith Prime. Earthborn students are not prey.